KPAY's Morning News continues on this Tuesday. It is June the 8th, 8:03 the time now. And we're just going to open it up this hour. We're breaking, as they say in the business, the format. Because as we heard and been reporting on, I guess it was announced Friday, but just got word out to folks that the deadline for the city of Chico to come up with a solution to the sheltering issue when it comes to homelessness has now been moved to June 25th. And, of course, as we've talked, and I want to introduce Attorney Rob Berry is with us again. Rob, thank you.
Scott.
Step up to that mic so we can really hear you, Rob.
There you go.
Perfect. And Walt McNeill also is here with us. Walt, thanks for making the drive up from Grass Valley.
Good morning, Scott.
Appreciate that.
Glad to be here.
Well, listen, we're gonna jump into this, and like I said this week, it seems to be the homeless issue on the KPAY Morning News, but seems like it's never gone away. Anyways, you've been on with us before, Rob. So. Yeah. Let us start a little bit now. What's the reaction to it? Basically, the deadline now being extended.
Well, this is not the first time it's been kicked down the road, right?
Hold on a second here. I think we're having trouble with your microphone a little bit.
Okay,
there we are. Okay, try.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Ah, right,
perfect.
So this is not the first time it's been kicked down the road. It started off April 10th. They issued the TRO, and they could have had a hearing soon, but they waited until the last minute, which was the 23rd. And then since then, they've extended it twice, and now it is extended to the 25th. So the actual arguments that the city would make against issuing a preliminary injunction have yet to be made in court. And so we have no idea what I shouldn't say we have no idea, but we have no official word, I guess, from the city about what they're thinking, what they think they need to do, what they're involved with, and so forth. We're sort of left to sort of connecting the clues that we get that the city drops sort of indirectly. So we talk about that quite a bit. But
yeah, and Rob, we've had you on before, and we've talked about this, and it all started, and basically you can't fault the pandemic really for this.
No.
Even though it was exacerbated the problem especially with people in our parks, right?
Well, I mean, the pandemic has a role here, and just it's not all that important, but I would say that the history of this problem that we have of people occupying the parks goes back quite a ways. And a lot of people forget that, Alex Brown, before the pandemic, had suggested that we drop the anti-camping laws and so forth, and that failed to pass, even when we had a majority that was supportive of her generally. And then when the pandemic came up, then that was the cover, let's say, for suspending the enforcement in the parks. And then we all know what happened after that.
All right. Well, let's get you in here.
Well, this has been a recurring problem, and it's been going on for years.
Right.
The default position by the city is, well, if we can't figure out what to do, let's just keep them in the parks. And that's what's been going on for the last 10 years while the homeless problem grows and grows. In the meantime, people in the city of Chico have lost their parks. Their waterways have been badly polluted. You have hypodermic needles, needle litter, upsurge in crime, and really people are afraid to use the public facilities they've paid for and enjoyed for years, and really make Chico the sort of the gem of a city that people love. The parks of Chico are something that I really appreciate. It's really sort of the heart, the beauty of the city, and it's really just a shame to see what's happened as they've gone downhill.
Let me ask you, Walt, did the city misread the case in Boise when it came to camping? Sit and lie, I guess, and all that. Did the city misinterpret that somehow when they came up with the ordinances, especially with not camping in our parks?
Well, they didn't pay attention to all the things they need to do, I guess is what I would say. And I would also want to tell not just you but your listeners that the law from this sort of landmark case does not require that cities or states build full-service hotel facilities or the types of cabins or
tiny homes,
Yeah. Right? Yeah, and there are a lot of options out there, and there are a lot of things that can be done, maybe should be done, but that's all discretionary. What the Boise case basically said is, look, you can't make a person a criminal just because they're homeless. You have to give them a place where they can rest their head, rest their body, lay down, take a nap, walk around. If you make the homeless move along, they have to have a place to move to. But at a minimum, it just needs to be open space, open ground. It doesn't mean there are certain housing requirements or certain services requirements or amenities that have to be provided. So what hasn't been discussed and has really been missing in this discussion is, first of all, what is the minimum amount of rest or open space that needs to be provided so that the homeless have a place to go. And then while they're there, wherever that may be, and believe me, the city has a lot of land out there, you work progressively on this homeless issue because, look, there's no magic pill to cure homelessness. It's not going to be cured today. It's not going to be cured before June 25th. That's a pipe dream. So we need a good place for homeless to rest. And in the meantime, there's a lot going on in this city to provide facilities for the homeless that's underway right now. And it's pretty amazing how much has come online in the way of shelter space and other services that are going to be made available, that are available today to the homeless, that they just need to take advantage of.
Yeah, we've heard of like the tiny house village that Chat's working on to provide some, but that's a limited number, again. And it's more transitional housing, I understand that. And,
right.
And then the arguments always come up, Robin. We've talked about this again.
Yeah.
You have that percentage, and I don't know the percentage, of those that just want to fly under the radar. They don't want anything to do with services or anything. That's their lifestyle, right? We've run into that. We've heard stories nonstop.
Well, one of the problems, and Walt.
So what do you do? What do you do with that population?
Well, I mean, first of all, one of the things that Walt and I have been working on this last week is just trying to figure out what the status is of the housing inventory,
right.
How much is occupied, where it exists, and all of that. That kind of information is just incredibly difficult to put your hands on. It's a moving target. It's I don't know, they're not forthcoming. The people that have the information are not forthcoming with it and so forth. So it's very difficult to understand what we have. But we hear, like just today was announced another $500,000 granted by Butte County Strong for some more houses through Chat. And the city awarded $282,000 for some hotel rooms for Chat for families and so forth and so on. These kinds of programs are emerging all over the place. The Jesus Center just opened. Mm-hmm. Taurus just removed their COVID restrictions, so they have another 100 beds. There are plenty of beds. And the other element of this is that no one denies the fact that even during the COVID restrictions on shelters, there were always empty beds every night, sometimes 20, sometimes 50, and so forth. So the question is, if the problem is a shortage of shelter beds, why is it that there's any empty beds whatsoever? And the answer is because there's a very large part of the population that does not want to accept shelter, that do not want to change their lifestyle, and so forth and so on. And as far as I know, there has never been a plan put forward in this city other than the idea of clearing out the parks and making them available for citizens, which started in December of 2020, right? To deal with the most difficult portion of the population. Now, I'll just mention one other element of that. The Pitt survey, which is, in my view, a very unreliable source of information, talks about the percentage of people that are on drugs and the people that have mental illness. On April 6th, there was a presentation by Scott Kenley, who's the director of the Behavioral Health Organization, right? And by his estimates, and he presented this in front of the city council, by his estimates, 80% of the population here that are living on the streets have a drugs or substance abuse problem. And between 60 and 80% have a confirmed mental health issue. Some of them are severe. And we just heard about a guy today that was arrested. He was going into a house.
Right.
It turned up being that he was on meth. He'd been up for 4 days. When you don't have rest for 4 days, you have paranoia and other sort of psychotic, and those things often result in violence. And so there's a definite connection between that population that has substance abuse and the crime and violence increase. And so these are all issues that have not really been addressed. And it's sort of tangential to this because even the pending case doesn't propose to deal with this most difficult portion of the population. It is just trying to define what are the city's obligations under the Martin v. Boise case. So,
okay.
Yeah, let me give you some current numbers on utilization of shelter beds that are actually available. And this is actually pretty fresh information. Unfortunately, it's information that the city manager of Chico is not giving to the city council. The Continuum of Care did what's called a housing inventory count, HIC, call it a HIC. And this is countywide, not just Chico, but countywide. They counted 1,470 bed spaces. Out of those bed spaces, 1,093 were being used. That's a utilization rate of 74%. On the shelter beds for transitional housing and emergency shelter, the numbers were even lower. They had a utilization rate of 65% for emergency shelter beds countywide. That's a 35% vacancy rate. You know, if you owned and operated a hotel or a motel, you'd go out of business if you had a 35% vacancy rate. There's something wrong there when you have that many beds and they aren't being used.
Is that on the providers or the city? Who does that fall on then? Is that the providers
what
or
fall on?
On that vacancy rate? Is that the providers not opening that, or is it the city not?
It is that, and recently an organization in town called Point of Contact, Lori Maloney and other people are involved in this, and they went out and surveyed, and they found of the people they talked to 115 people. I think it was 50% said that they're really not interested in shelter, and another 17% said, I think that's the number, said that, yeah, we would consider it, but then they are not taking any action to do it. So you have 2/3 of the population basically just declaring that they're going to stay where they are as long as they're allowed to stay there. And right now, that's been years.
Right. So we're going to take a quick break because I got to pay some bills here. Okay. So we're going to come back. We're talking with attorneys Rob Berry and Walt McNeill this morning. We'll continue on that. Because once you say, okay, you're not going to do it, then do you kick them out? I guess you kick them out of town, right? Or what do you do?
Let's talk about that.
Somebody else's problem? All right, let's talk. We'll take a quick break. It's 8:17 now. The morning news. All right, we are back talking to attorneys Rob Berry and Walt McNeill. And Walt, we want to get you in here because you wrote a letter that presented to the city council here, and I want you to kind of get into that. And it's really this community group protecting our parks and waterways. And we know, I mean, people here, you know, they live by the park. They're camping. You look underneath overpasses and everything else, and there you see tents everywhere anymore. Right. But especially with the park, you can't go walk in the park anymore. You can't let your kids ride their bikes through the park anymore.
Yeah, it is really a disgrace that the people of Chico have lost the use of their parks and their waterways, and it's not safe to walk through the parks. It's not safe to ride your bike through the parks, and that doesn't need to be. And this is a city that needs to do something about this. And that's why Rob and I are here, actually. Our client is the Chico Stewards of Parks and Waterways. And it's a group of people dedicated to preserving the parks and the waterways for public use, to enjoy their beauty and their safety, and to oppose policies like what we're seeing these days that keep the homeless in the parks, whether it's by intention or by sheer incompetence, really. And you have to be blunt about this. The homeless have been occupying Chico's parks and waterways for years and years, primarily because of bureaucratic incompetence in City Hall. You can't get around that fact. And to make matters worse, the solution, if you want to call it that seems to be fixated on by the city manager and the city generally is to build facilities that require construction standards, services, a whole range of amenities and insurance, which is impossible to get, at a cost that hasn't been publicly discussed, but you'll see on the news if you look anywhere that this has been tried. Let me give you a couple of examples. Los Angeles, as you know, is just a disaster for the homeless, right? Okay. Well, so there was a recent interview of Mayor Garcetti about his homeless shelter project. He was very proud of it. He had 39 units on a lot in the middle of Skid Row, 39 tiny homes, pallet shelters, and for 39 tiny homes, it cost them $5.4 million. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, that's just L.A. L.A.'s expensive for everything. Well, let's come up north. There's a place called Los Galicos. It's in Sonoma County. It's outside Santa Rosa. In Los Galicos, they had 60 shelters at a total cost of $3,258,000 at a unit cost of $54,000 a unit. And these units are 64 square feet, prefab, basically plastic buildings, almost like a tough shed, but they meet the minimum requirements. And it's the bureaucratic costs and everything that go with it that drive the cost up. The city of Chico right now is considering exactly that kind of so-called solution. And I can tell you, this is a critical point for this city, because once you go down that road, it's hard to turn back. And if this city is going to dive into and invest in a $5 million homeless shelter that only produces something like 50 units of housing, it will, I wouldn't say bankrupt, but it will impoverish your city and really harm rather than help the efforts that are being made to actually provide shelter to the homeless. And look, I don't want us to seem like we lack compassion for the people who are traumatized out there that just need to find shelter and help and medical assistance and the things that they need to make their lives work. We're sympathetic to that, but it shouldn't be done at the expense of our parks and the waterways. There are better ways to do it. And there is space and there is city land in this city where the homeless can go and where the service providers can meet them. And that's what the city should pursue is ways to connect these homeless with the nonprofit, non-government service providers so that they get the kind of attention that they need.
Then it comes down to, and I'll bring it up, not in my backyard.
Well,
Rob, we've talked about that before.
Right, and I think this is an important point.
So people have to change their whole thinking about this. If you want the solutions, you got to be able to work with the solutions.
Right. Okay. So the one of the reasons I believe, what Walt is talking about, this sort of bureaucratic incompetence, and the fact that we're on our third cycle of city councils since I've been following this that have, essentially haven't dealt with the problem, is because any solution that they come up with, any sort of use of city land that they come up with, is going to face some local opposition.
Pushback, yep.
And especially now we have district representation. Now, as you saw, Topeka Tannen raised the point that, hey, it seems to me that all of the homeless services are being concentrated in District 7. That doesn't seem right. And so the fear of dealing with the political pushback of utilizing any city property for this purpose is, they're reluctant to do it because they know they're going to have to deal with local residents who are not happy. But I would also say this. When residents think about like some local land, city lot near them being used for this purpose, what they think about is they think about Comanche Creek. They think about the campgrounds where there's this crime den, and we just had two women pointing guns at each other yesterday over some dispute at Comanche Creek. And so this is the idea that they have in their mind about what the alternative would look like. But I would pose the question this way, just to make it simple. Let's assume for the moment, just as a thought exercise, that there was absolutely no shelter available anywhere in Chico, that nobody had access to shelter. What would be the minimum requirement that the city would need to meet in order to satisfy the Martin case? And the answer Walt already gave. There needs to be some place designated for somebody to put down a sleeping bag and take a nap after the parks close and not be arrested for sleeping on public property. And that's it, period, full stop. That is the end of the obligation. And so the political pushback about this is not going to be as severe when you disperse in a couple of different city lots just a designated place where people can go and put down, not camp, not erect a tent, not bring all their personal property and store it. All of those things can be enforced. But you cannot eliminate every single piece of public property in the city and say that nobody is allowed to sleep here anywhere else in the city. And that's essentially that's the big misunderstanding that is operating.
So in other words, protect our parks, the waterways. Don't let them camp in Bidwell Park or over by Tykert Pond, which is turning out to be another one that I'm seeing.
Right.
But you can allow them to just come in and have a place.
Well, first of all, I would say, for clarification,
okay.
Chico Stewards of Parks and Waterways take the position that under no circumstances shall parks or waterways be degraded as a result of illegal camping anywhere in Chico. Okay. Any place that's a park, nobody should be able to camp in a park. Now, what happens to the people that get removed from the parks? Are they going to wander around like zombies, wondering where to lay down and whatever? No, there has to be a place that is designated where somebody that is prohibited from sleeping or camping in a park has a place to go lay down and sleep, because sleeping is an unavoidable consequence of being a human being, and you can't make that a crime.
And that's where the city went wrong before, really. They simply said, get out, but didn't give them directions to go anywhere.
Didn't tell them where they could go.
If you look at the transcript of the hearing, this is what the judge was asking. What do you expect these people to do? Walk around the city for 24 hours a day? Where are they supposed to go? And the problem is the city's attorney didn't have an answer for that question. You know why he didn't have an answer? Because the city manager and the city administration here was not looking for an answer. They were not looking for solutions. And the city attorney had nothing to say in that hearing. And it didn't come off well, to tell you the truth. We can do better than that.
Let's talk a little bit about Judge England.
Sure.
What's your thoughts on the judge? I've heard straightforward, right down the line, doesn't play politics, no left, no right. It's like,
I don't know who wants to go here. Like
either one, jump in. I don't care.
Go ahead, Rob.
What do you think?
So first of all, I listened, and so did Walt, to the actual live hearing.
Right.
And then the transcript. You know, everybody got a copy of the transcript, and I've probably read that transcript a dozen times by now, looking for every little clue and so forth. And so I would say that, like, number one, I would say, as I said before, we are extremely fortunate to have drawn this particular judge because he knows what he's doing. He has litigated these kind of cases before. He's not a political animal. He's a lifetime appointment. And so he doesn't really care what you think about him or whatever, and he has committed himself to follow the law. Now, he said a couple things that were extremely important. Number one, during the opening comments in this hearing, the plaintiffs were making the argument, essentially, that we've been talking about, which is that, hey, we've got 1,000 homeless people, we only have 800 beds, therefore there's not enough beds, so therefore you got to make more beds. And the judge said, you're making up an entirely new theory about what the Martin v. Boise case says, and I'm not going to let you do that. You don't get to make up a theory. And they had arguments about what does access mean? Does access mean, well, if I have a dog and they don't let me in the shelter, does that mean I don't have access? And the judge says, no, that's not what Martin says. Martin doesn't say it's got to be the shelter I want or the shelter I like or the shelter that lets me bring my dog. That's not what it says. It says, is there a place that I can go into and sleep? And that's access. So that was on the plaintiff side. On the defense side, he turns to Vince and he says, where are people going to go? And Vince says, well, what he actually said was, I issued an order for you to disclose to me by 4 o'clock, a couple of days before the hearing, a list of places that people are allowed to go. And so he shows up at the hearing. He hadn't responded to the order, right? And the judge says, how come you didn't respond to the order? And what city attorney said was, well, I couldn't comply with the order because there is no such property that I can identify. And the judge said, are you telling me that there is no place in this city where somebody can lay down and take a rest? And Vince said, that's right. And the judge said, okay, fine. Shall I just issue the preliminary injunction then? And he would have been completely justified in issuing a permanent injunction or a preliminary injunction at that point, because the city attorney just admitted that there is no place that they're going to allow people to sit and rest. And the irony of that statement is that part of what Walt and I have been doing is we've been testing that theory. So it turns out that on the city website, there is a list of all city property owned. And the city owns 10,000 acres, 550 of which are open space. Not parks, not designated parks, but just open space. And so we actually sent in information before the hearing about here's the land, here's a couple of parcels that would work. And rather than pursue that as a strategy, what happened was what I just described, which is that Vince Ewing, the city attorney, denied that there was any property that they could list for the judge about where people can go. And so that was a major mistake. A lot of people have talked about that and so forth and so on. But the land, parcels, 1 acre here, lots there. I mean, we went and looked at specific parcels of property. And we've identified tens of parcels that would be viable in every way that we can establish in terms of, are they big enough? Are they not impacting the neighborhood so much? Are they being put to any other use? So forth and so on. And so, our position is that there is property and none of them are parks.
Is that on the city then? They're just not moving forward?
We'll have to draw our own conclusion about what their thinking is because we don't know.
You don't know about anything that you don't look for.
True. Or
don't want to find. And that's the problem with the city administration. There's city land there. Rob and I have actually gone out and walked on these parcels. We've taken pictures of them. They range in size from a quarter acre up to 16 acres. And they're in different, districts, different locations all around the city. Some are like in the middle of the city almost. Some are out towards the airport on the edge of the city limits, and everything in between. Some are better than others, of course, but there's a lot to choose from. And if you're going to tell the homeless these are places you can go, it's probably better to put them in different places, give them a little elbow room. You don't want the congested situation that you have at Comanche Creek. That's probably the worst of all circumstances.
And I think the other aspect of this is that, there are more than 10 parcels that we've identified out of the whole list, right? And so two things about that property. Number one is, if you're not putting any infrastructure, if you're not putting any, if you're not developing the site and you're not investing money and you're not hiring people to run them and all of that stuff, then that means that they're available today as we sit here. They could be used for this purpose today without any lead time. Number one. Number two, on the issue that Walt is raising about, concentration of people in one place and all that kind of stuff, we don't know how many people are going to avail themselves of these places if they're made available. We have no idea. And so it's not necessary for the city to open up 5 parcels or 10 parcels somewhere. Right. It's all that's necessary is to say, we have this parcel that we're going to designate. If that gets full, we start getting 20 or 30 people or up to 50 or whatever, then we're going to open parcel number 2, and here it is, and here's where it's going to be. And we're going to expand the list based on demand and management issues and stuff like that. But there's no lead time. There's no RFQ necessary. There's no hiring people and allocation of funds necessary. All it is here's a spot, here's a map, here's how you get there. And if you go there and lay down and rest, you won't be arrested. And we're done.
And let's make the point that this is not the permanent magic solution to homelessness, and it's not intended to be, but it does satisfy the requirements of Martin v. Boise.
I was going to ask
and
you.
It gets directly at that question. The lawsuit goes away. We help the homeless get the rest and room to breathe that they need, and you continue working on the homeless situation in various ways. And there's a lot of good people in this city doing hard work to put together shelter space, programs, services, and we get them focused on the homeless where we know they're going to be located. And you keep working the problem till you get to that solution. So we aren't trying to promote the final solution to homelessness.
So this is all the judge is looking for then, is just come and say, hey, here's what we have.
Right. This is what I was saying earlier, that that there's really 2 separate issues. The first issue, the most critical issue, the issue that needs to be dealt with today and yesterday and on April 23rd is, what does the city need to do to get this lawsuit gone? Because we want to enforce our parks. That's what they started off doing, and that's what they're trying to get to. So satisfying the requirements of the case is one thing. But then that gives us whatever room we choose to try to deal with the larger issue of what about the homeless population in this town and what are we going to do about it? That's a conversation that we can have on our own pace, and we can define our own role. And I do believe very strongly what Walt just said. There's a lot of people that are sincerely trying to be helpful. And I may not agree, and not everybody agrees with everybody's approach, and and all of that. But the intent to be helpful is there, and the resources are there. And I do believe that the city has a legitimate role to play in this conversation. whether it's a regulatory role, a coordinating role, like who knows? Like there's a lot of options that could be discussed, but we'll never have that conversation. We've never had it so far. I've been at this for 4.5 years now, believe it or not, and we've never had that conversation. And so the fact that we haven't come up with a solution shouldn't be surprising to anybody because we're not really looking for a solution. We're arguing about whether this guy's plan is good and whether the city's obligated to do this and whether the city has to start a campground and so forth and so on. And that discussion has very little to do with the Warren case. The Warren case is a very narrow case that charges that by the practices that the city's engaged with, they are violating the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution as decided by Martin v. Boise. So the first question we should ask is, okay, what does Martin say? Now here's another part of the transcript that I think it's sort of skipped over. And that was during the end of the hearing, the judge was sort of lamenting about the fact that he was getting a lot of letters from the public and, a lot of people writing into him. And he was kind of appalled at the level of ignorance that was demonstrated about what the Martin case says in these letters. Everybody was making claims and whatever. And so he gave another admonition to both parties, and it was, you need to go back and educate your constituency about what the Martin case actually says and what it requires. And not a single effort has been made to do that. And it would be very helpful because in the absence of that kind of conversation, everybody is free to make up their own interpretation. And lawyers, non-lawyers, politicians, city staff are all operating under their own personal interpretation of what that case requires. And nobody is debating and actually, I've got the case here. It's not a difficult case to read. And that conversation is not taking place. Even the mayor's ad hoc meetings, there was specific instructions not to talk about the case. And that is exactly the opposite of what should have happened. It would have been an opportunity to bring in the city attorney, to bring in some other lawyers, and talk about what the Martin case actually says and requires.
Now, again, the Martin case, Martin versus Boise, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure so we know, listeners know.
Yeah, Martin v. Boise.
Okay.
So, and that has not happened. And so I don't know how the judge is going to react to that because he's still getting letters. They show up on the docket, and, they're still all over the map. And if I was him, I wouldn't be happy about it, Yeah.
Walt, we're going to, I think, wrap things up here. I think we've covered, unless you got other points you want to bring up here. We're shortly getting towards the top of the hour here.
I can't believe how fast that
it's
hour
gone.
went.
It's gone quick.
Yeah, it has gone quickly. Thank you for having us.
So what do you think? What do you think the judge is going to do now? Unless the city moves on something, they're having a closed session today. With this latest pushback of the.
I'll toss that one to Walt.
Okay. So what do you think, Walt? We'll give you last word here.
Well,
for now.
For now.
For now.
Right. I think the city is headed down a road where it's likely to be under a court order, whether it's a preliminary injunction or temporary restraining order for the next 6 months to a year or longer, until there is a definitive approach to dealing with the questions raised by Martin v. Boise, and that doesn't necessarily entail the perfect solution to homelessness. Right now, the city, unfortunately, is only considering those perfect solutions to homelessness, the $5 million, $10 million options that I'd be surprised that the city can afford if they go that direction. But even if they wanted to build something like that today, it would be 6 months to a year before you could even get it up. So unless this city turns around quickly and gets a laser focus on what do we have to do to satisfy the basic minimum requirements to give homeless people room to breathe, basically, and satisfy those minimum requirements of Martin, the city's going to be under the gavel of the court for a long time to come, and in search of solutions that have failed everywhere else. Los Angeles, Los Gallegos, Sacramento, the list goes on and on and on of failed attempts like what the city of Chico is thinking of doing right now. And it's time for some creative, strong leadership in this city to get us going in the right direction where we can get our quality of life back in the parks and waterways. That's what's critical. And take care of the homeless in a way so that incrementally we can get them the services and help that they truly need.
I just want to put a sales pitch in here. Like this organization, Stewards for Chico, Parks and Waterways, Chico, is a grassroots organization. We're raising funds to support this lawsuit and so forth. So I would just ask anybody that wants to support, look us up on the GoFundMe page and donate if you can. It's Chico Stewards for Parks and Waterways. You can find it that way.
All right, Rob Berry, Walt McNeill, we appreciate you coming in. We could go all day.
Yeah.
We really could.
There's a lot to talk about. Yeah.
And listen the next couple of days because we're going to have service providers in tomorrow, and then we'll hear from somebody from the city council on Thursday already set up to talk to.
I really appreciate you facilitating a conversation on this topic.
I mean, and
really
it should be,
helps.
and it needs to be. And I think if the first step is just saying, "Hey, the city, here's what we have. Here's where they can go."
Right.
Just to let the lawsuits and everything else kind of disappear. I think that's all the judge is looking for. Right? That's it.
I think so.
In a nutshell.
Right.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in.